Okay, today is the 17th of July 2016, and this video is about how to set yourself up to read the tarot. So I think everybody can learn to read cards, and it's not that difficult, though it may take a little bit of time to get the hang of it and of what to do. But I don't think it's something that is automatic, or that the ability to read cards is suddenly there and complete. So I don't think you can pick a card for the first time and immediately know what it means or how to read it. So yes, you can pick the Three of Swords, for instance, and see that it shows pain, right? You've got the three swords through the heart. So, and if the question is, will I pass my accountancy exam, right? And you get the Three of Swords, it's easy to think that the answer is no, you won't, because it looks like pain and disappointment, so you're going to fail the exam. But the truth may be that yes, you will pass the exam, and you're going to experience pain because you hate accounting and you want to do something else, but you're good at accounting, and it makes sense to get a job as an accountant because it can be hard to justify doing something else, right? And people keep telling you you'll make a good accountant since you're so good at it. So you see the Three of Swords and the pierced heart, and you make a connection. And maybe you say something about this card that's wise, but it doesn't mean that you're reading what's there. You can be seeing and seeing the picture and making a connection, and that's okay. But that's not automatically the same as making correct sense of the card. But you can talk easily about the card, and you seem to be doing a good job, so you don't wonder if you're actually reading what's there. And it's really easy to jump to conclusions or to think something is obvious and never really question it, even though by questioning you would learn something more so you could read better. So this video is about how to set yourself up to read the tarot. And if you like the video and what we talk about, then you have Sally in Australia to thank for it, because it began with her making a comment about the Nine of Pentacles in Tammy's Celtic Cross reading. And I found myself disagreeing with the comment. And as I tried to figure out what to say in reply and how to deal with the point that Sally had made, I ended up with this video. So what happened was that Tammy's question was, what is her future with the tarot? And she did a Celtic Cross spread. And she got the Nine of Pentacles in the fourth position. That's the card that shows what is passing away. Right? So I mentioned in a video that there's a falcon. In North America, they call the bird a falcon. Right? But I'm Scottish, and we always called it a falcon and a falconer. But if you're in North America, and if you're American, you may want me to say falcon and falconer, but I'm not going to. I'm going to say falcon. So falconry is a very specialized hobby, we could say. Or maybe it's a specialized sport that not everybody can play. So I thought, because the falcon was there and it's specialized, maybe Tammy would take, because it's what's passing away, maybe she would take the tarot from a specialized application and turn it into something she could deal with regular people with and get away from the private or isolated use that's shown by what really is a specialized skill of falconry. Then Sally commented about, could the Nine of Pentacles in this fourth position mean that Tammy's interest in the material world is passing? And as I look at it, the card now, I can see that the wealth shown in the Nine of Pentacles can be a kind of interest in material stuff, and it's passing away, right? So we can look and think that what's passing away is interest in the material world. And her involvement with the tarot means that she's entering a new spiritual realm. Okay. The problem for me, was I wasn't sure how Sally made this connection between the Nine of Pentacles and the new spiritual realm. So I asked this, and she said that because they say there's a spiritual bond between the falconer and the bird, then this can account for the presence of Tammy entering a new spiritual realm. Right? I still didn't get this, and maybe what was going on was that the idea of entering a new spiritual realm is good, and it would be useful for somebody who's learning to read the tarot, right? Because if you can bring something extra to your interpretation and bring a spiritual understanding to the meanings that you give particular cards, that's probably going to make for a good reading. So this idea of spiritual beginnings and spiritual understanding might be something you would want to include if you were doing a reading for somebody about the future with the tarot. But my problem is I can't see the connection between the Nine of Coins and a new beginning, which is what Sally pointed out. So I can see an ace as a new beginning, or a 10 as a new beginning because it's 1 plus 0 gets you back to 1 again. Or I can see the Fool as a new beginning, or the Magician is number 1, or the Death card as a new beginning. But I don't understand why this Nine of Pentacles would indicate a new beginning or emerging into or entering into a new spiritual realm. Also, the card is in the 4th position, and this position shows what's passing away. So if the Falcon does show a spiritual bond, would this not show that the spiritual bond is passing away? So it's kind of like the opposite of entering a new spiritual realm. It's more like leaving a spiritual realm. So I've been thinking about what to say to Sally and how to reply to her. And this is what this video is about. So let me begin this way. Okay, I mentioned earlier that I think everybody can learn to read cards. But there's a difference between looking at a card and saying something wise and reading what's there. Because when you read a book, you're reading words, but it's as if with a tarot spread and a tarot reading, the words or the meaning in the cards are the questioners, and they're not yours, they're not the reader's. So you can't take what you would do or what you see and apply it directly to the questioner. The example I gave earlier was the 3 of Swords as pain, but that doesn't have to indicate that the pain will be the failing of the exam. Right? It could be something else. The pain of the 3 of Swords could refer to something else, or it could be referring to something kind of bigger, something around the question. Right? So it may be to do with the person's whole future life that revolves around success at accountancy, rather than just passing the exam. But it's easy to jump to conclusions or to never question your beliefs. And let me give you an example. And it has to do with my wife's sister. Also, my sister-in-law has 3 children. She's a daughter, a son, and another daughter. And years and years ago, like 25 years ago, when the son was a few years old, we were at a cottage, a family get-together in one summer, and the children referred to the boy as Guy, right? And somebody there told me that Guy was short for geek, okay, because the boy was a bit of a geek. Okay, so over the years, I would sometimes hear the family refer to the boy as Guy, and it seemed like not exactly an insult, but they were kind of teasing him, okay? And I had a certain understanding of what they meant when they said Guy. But then about 6 months ago, I discovered that, okay, there's a fellow, an English movie director, Madonna's ex-husband was Guy Ritchie, G-U-Y. And the French pronunciation of the name Guy is Guy, right? So there's a French writer called Guy de Maupassant, and there's a French Quebec hockey player called Guy Lafleur. So it turns out that Guy wasn't short for geek. It was actually a reference to the French pronunciation of the word Guy, of Guy. right? So I assumed that the family was teasing the boy, but in fact it was something different, and it was friendly and private, and they all understood what they meant when they called him Guy, right? So I'm giving that example because I'm asking you, how many ideas or thoughts or beliefs do you have that seem obvious and are so obviously true that you never think about them or wonder if they're really true, but you just accept them and you build on them, even though you're building on sand? So this is something I'll come back to in a bit. So I'm using the example that Sally gave about the falcon and the spiritual bond because it's a good starting point. And even though I'm disagreeing with Sally, it's very useful what she says, but I'm not criticizing her in any way. But what I have trouble with is the step that she takes with the idea, the spiritual bond, and what she does with it, or the step that she takes next. Right, and that's where I think my problem lies, because I think it's a bit of a leap. Okay, you're going from the spiritual bond, but then suddenly you're way over there. So the idea of the spiritual bond between the falconer and the bird and the trainer says something about the relationship between the human and the bird. But it's from the human point of view, not the bird's point of view, so it's one-sided. So the falcon is a wild hunting bird that has been tamed, right? So it's no longer itself, and you have to wonder if it's really still a falcon, even though it still goes off and attacks small animals and rips them apart with its claws and its beak, right? But which I can't help but think it's an odd thing to have a spiritual bond with, and it makes me wonder about how spiritual it really is, since I tend to think that the spiritual is a pacifist and not much in favour of violence and the causing of pain, which the poor animal that's caught by the falcon has to experience. So I think the idea of there being a bond between the falconer and the bird is a bit of a leap to take that to take that jump and then apply it to Tammy and an ability with reading the tarot. And that kind of leap happens if you don't go slowly and in detail. So Sally can want to make a good point about Tammy moving on to a new spiritual path. And this would make sense for a question about somebody's future with the tarot. But I don't see how she gets this from the card that came up. So it might be good advice, but somehow it's not reading the card. So you can be as psychic or intuitive as much as you want. But I think that reading the card, what's there, is better, since it means you don't get stuck, or you don't get to the point where you don't know what to say because your intuition has dried up. And at the same time, if you read the card, you stick to what is relevant or what's answering the question that was asked. So what I mean is this: I think when examining the picture on the card, you have to start at the beginning and describe it in detail, right? So in this case, we've got the falconer and a falcon on his wrist. But if we talk about the spiritual bond between the trainer and the bird, we're leaving out a lot of detail and a lot of information, and we may be seeing what we want to see, or picking and choosing what supports the point we want to make, or the point that we think we ought to make. But if we start at the beginning and go into detail about the falcon and the falconry, if we describe it, what we see in the picture, somebody's standing and he's got heavy protection on his wrist. And this is to stop the sharp claws of the bird damaging his arm. And having a wild bird there is dangerous, and it could backfire, even though the bird has been trained, because it's still nature and it's a wild animal. And as Dr. Malcolm said in Jurassic Park, life will find a way. So we know that the Jurassic Park, that the park something's going to go wrong. And it can also go wrong with this hunting bird. So we've got the falconer with the protection on his arm. We've also got the falcon, which is a wild bird that's a very efficient hunter with excellent eyesight, right, that spots its prey from a distance away and swoops down on it at speed and uses its sharp claws and its beak to rip the prey to shreds before eating it. That's what a falcon does. But now the bird is being fed by the owner. Even if it doesn't catch anything, right, it's going to get fed anyway, so it doesn't have to do what it was born to do. And it's being trained and it's being held captive. So maybe instead of there being a bond, a spiritual bond between the falconer and the bird, there's a version of the Stockholm Syndrome, right, which was, that's the condition in which people who are being held hostage and kept against their will become fans of the captors, and they identify the captors as saviors rather than jailers, because they mistake a lack of abuse for an act of kindness. So with all this in mind, what's going on with the falconer? Is there a spiritual bond? And if so, what's the nature of this bond? Okay, so if you take a point from a card and describe to yourself in detail what's going on, as we did with the falcon and the sharp beak and the claws and so on, you end up with a better understanding that you can then apply to the question to get a more correct answer. And it should all make sense and be consistent. So you also ask yourself what, if anything, you're ignoring, or what you're choosing to ignore that disproves your point or that doesn't support what you're trying to show. So how do you set yourself up? I think partly you examine your beliefs and the opinions that you have. So you pay attention to what you're thinking and you make sure you aren't just believing what other people tell you. It doesn't mean that you automatically reject everything that anybody says, but you still add your own examined thoughts and ideas to what you've been told or what you've been taught or what you've been brought up with. So this can mean that you ponder on what you say and what you think, and you wonder about what you're saying, and you see where your thoughts take you, and you don't make leaps from one situation to another, because that's a bit like going fast from where you are to some distance away, instead of starting with where you are and looking within the situation. So as an example, I was wondering what to do with this. So we know that golf and football are both played with a ball, right? So you might think they have something in common. And so what applies to one game also applies to the other, in the same way that the falconer can indicate a spiritual bond with the bird, so there's also a spiritual bond between Tammy and the taro, right? You've got a connection in one area and you imagine that it exists in another area as well. So I was giving the example of golf and football because they both use a ball. But then you might argue that, okay, you can't really compare golf and football because football is played between two teams of 11 players, whereas with golf, you're really battling against yourself, right? So maybe we could come up with a different sport, a couple of different sports. So what about tennis and table tennis? They're both played with one or two people against one or two other people, and they're hitting a ball back and forth across a net, right? So you might think this is the same, but you know that tennis and table tennis, that the rules and the scoring are different. So you can't take what you do in tennis and assume that it also works with table tennis. So I'm thinking the same way, when you see something in a card, don't immediately think it can be applied somewhere else. Maybe it can, but it's better if you see how and why it can be connected and identify the intermediate steps instead of going straight to the assumption or straight to the conclusion. on making the leap. It's easier to make a leap, right? But it's better if you go slowly when it comes to understanding cards and their meanings as they relate to answering questions. It may take a bit of time to improve your reading, but I think if you go step by step and make yourself slow down and be sure about the logic and the sense of going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, then you get to step 4 instead of going straight to step number 4. If you take your time and go step by step, you'll get there. So you don't need to rush or expect overnight success. That was it about how to set yourself up to do a tarot reading. And I hope you enjoyed it. So leave a comment if you wish somewhere down below. And the last point I'd like to make is I added some new material at the Tarot Course site. And I think it's quite interesting and also in its own way quite exciting, what's happening there. So take a look, and you might like to join because there's going to be more, lots more over time. I'll add a bit now, regularly. And I'll be taking my lead from members and their questions and their concerns. So we all end up doing better readings with more confidence, not just in the tarot, but in ourselves, because of the approach that we take. Okay, that's it from me until next week. So have a good week, and I'll see you again. Okay, bye-bye.